I'm Aisha.
And I'm Vanessa.
I'm the secretary and currently primary contact for Students for Justice Palestine at the new school. It's nice to see all of you.
And I'm currently co-chair for SJP.
We're some of the TNS-SJP officers here at the new school, and I just want to thank you all for coming to this event. And we are a newly re-registered student organization here at the new school, and we're really excited for this to be our first event back. We have so many people to thank, but first of all, we have been working together to put together this event with Al-Awda NY, Palestinian Assembly for Liberation, and the administrative representatives from SLI, and we couldn't have done it without them, and our fellow SJP members. A little about Students for Justice in Palestine. Our SJP is an organization dedicated to the liberation of the Palestinian people and to holding the settler state of Israel accountable for its 75-year occupation and genocide of the Palestinian peoples within the student and academic space and beyond, to the best of our abilities. We are so grateful to our distinguished guest, historian and social activist, Ilan Pappé, for being here today. Thank you so much for lending us your time and knowledge today. We are so grateful to have you. And we also want to thank, obviously, who you will meet in a second, Lamis from Al-Awda NY. And we'll meet a few more faces as they come up here and speak. But I'm going to pass it over to Vanessa to talk a little bit more about our responsibility as students in the issue of Palestine.
Thank you, Aisha. So as SJP, we really want to stress the importance of getting involved in a political organization. I think it can be easy as students, as young people, as people in America to feel like you're like helpless, like there's nothing that you can do, but nothing can be further from the truth. I believe that it's our responsibility to support Palestine by controlling the narrative, combating misinformation, and especially pushing back against our repressive governments. We can expand support for Palestine through mobilization, education, organization, protesting, educating, sharing, writing, donating, and boycotting. I think let this compel you to action and to collective solidarity. We are all made complicit in the occupation by American empire, and therefore we have the responsibility to express solidarity at the very least. And now we have our two other SJP representatives, Rose and Shoki.
Thank you everyone for coming out tonight and for signing up online. Thank you Vanessa and Aisha, and thank you to our distinguished guest, Ilan Pappé, and the organizers of Al-Awda. I'm Rose, and my fellow speaker is Shoki. In response to efforts made by the university president to dehumanize and delegitimize the Palestinian resistance, we offer the following words. We, the new school Students for Justice in Palestine, unequivocally stand with the Palestinian people as they resist apartheid, colonization, and 75 years of violent Israeli occupation. We affirm the Palestinian right to return to their homes, as well as the right to defend themselves against a brutal US-backed military occupation as enshrined in international law.
As many of you are aware, in the last week, our organization issued a statement to President Shalala rejecting, within the strongest terms, her ahistorical and propagandistic statements on the siege of Gaza. We conveyed to President Shalala that any appraisal of this week's events that does not take into account the context of Israel's ongoing occupation and transformation of Gaza, transformation of Gaza into the world's largest open-air prison completely misconstrues the real issue at hand. We of course believe that the past week represents the inevitable escalation of a reality in which the Palestinian people have been deprived of running water, of heat, access to education, employment and medical services, and have been subject to kidnapping, imprisonment, degradation, killing, and bombing of entire villages and homes.
Excluding the experiences of the oppressed is not an innocent omission or an accidental oversight, but a purposeful act of violence against memory and history. This week's bombardment is only the latest attempt by the Israeli occupation to eradicate the Gaza Strip. Running parallel to this is an intentional destruction of the historical tools necessary to understand the process by which Palestinians were stripped of their land, rights, and livelihood. By erasing history, Western institutions, including our own, enforce the matrix of control that has already reconfigured the geography and narrative of the region. To overlook or minimize these facts is to compromise moral clarity and to be complicit in these crimes. We, the New School SJP, have watched minute by minute as this administration rewrites the Palestinian liberation through elitists, terrorist fear-mongering, and framing of the issue as an Israel-Hamas conflict rather than acknowledging the genocide of the Palestinians. And now we must watch as the university refuses to acknowledge Israel's crimes against humanity, their ongoing efforts to commit a second Nakba through the displacement of 1.1 million Gazans, and the deaths of over 1,000 Gazan children in the last 8 days alone. These omissions serve to rewrite the history of the present in order to legitimize the occupation.
Tonight, we invite Dr. Pappé to connect our very particular struggle against elements of this administration to the broader project of constructing material history of Palestinian resistance. His work has been pivotal to building a new method for history, for acknowledging openly these myths about the foundation of Israel, all the way up to where we are today. We thank Dr. Pappé for his continued contributions to Palestinian history, and we are confident that this history can be a backbone for the principled defense of the Palestinian people. Tackling this information requires us to commit to the very details of this occupation and the realities on the ground. And yet, there is very little room for nuance. We reject any equivocation between the Palestinian resistance and the Israeli occupation. US-backed and nuclear-powered Israel represents the grossest form of military occupation, colonialism, and state-sponsored terrorism. On the other hand, Palestinians are by and large a displaced people, occupied where they are not displaced, majority civilian, and multilaterally starved, both by Israel and the international community.
Disinformation rooted in racist Orientalist tropes has led to a rise of xenophobia and Islamophobia, resulting in acts of violence in the West. We mourn the loss of 6-year-old Wadia Al-Fayoumi, a Palestinian-American boy from Chicago who was murdered in accordance with the rhetoric spread by politicians, media outlets, and social media platforms. These dehumanizing fallacies manipulate language and embed hatred in the minds of the Western public. As June Jordan once wrote, "And what shall we do? We who did not die." The people of Gaza have called on the international community to carry their voices, share their stories, and expose the harsh realities of the occupation. Gazans continue to advocate for liberation even in the face of imminent death. And the Israeli occupation responds by cutting off the internet and electricity. Against all odds, Gazans have inspired towards global mobilization, pushing for universal decolonization and freedom from all forms of oppression and imperialism. We will fulfill the promise to the Gazan people to share their stories and to never forget how they laid their lives for the Palestinian resistance.
In light of this never-ending need to explain, re-explain, and re-justify the importance of Palestinian life, we finish with the words of our comrade Franz Fanon. Decolonization never takes place unnoticed, for it influences individuals and modifies them fundamentally. It transforms spectators crushed with their inessentiality into privileged actors, with the grandiose layer of history's floodlights upon them. It brings upon a natural rhythm to existence, introduced by new men, with it a new language and a new humanity. The thing which has been colonized becomes human, during the very same process by which it frees itself.
We are delighted to introduce Fatin Jabrara as our next speaker. Fatin is a New York-based Palestinian community organizer, having organized in Al-Awda, New York, Palestine Return Coalition for 20 years. She is also a member of the Palestinian Assembly for Liberation and represents both organizations today.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Fatin Jabrara. I am here with Al-Awda New York Palestine Right to Return Coalition and with the Palestinian Assembly for Liberation. Thank you so much for being with us. I would like to read a statement on behalf of the Palestinian Assembly for Liberation and Al-Awda New York Palestine Right to Return Coalition. The Palestinian Assembly for Liberation and Al-Awda New York begin by asking for a moment of silence to honor the over 3,000 Palestinians murdered by the Zionist apartheid for genocide entity and its settler agents in Gaza, and the over 200 who have been killed on the West Bank these past few days. We send our love to our people in Gaza struggling to survive on an ongoing barbaric genocidal assault without basic supplies for physical survival while keeping their spirit of resistance to Zionist oppression and war crimes alive. And we say to them, we stand with you, we hear you, and we watch you. We do not rest until you rest. And we will not rest until all of Palestine is free. We salute the Palestinian freedom fighters who sacrificed themselves for the sake of freedom for their people, who continue to bravely fight for land and liberation. We stand with you as unflinchingly as we would do with the Palestinian struggle for liberation and return. The Palestinian Assembly for Liberation and Al-Awda New York call upon all people of conscience to loudly declare the commitment to support that struggle at this most crucial time, to undertake sustained action to bring an immediate end to the Zionist genocide in Palestine, in Gaza today, and if unchecked, elsewhere tomorrow, and to follow through on that commitment with sustained action. We understand this genocide as part of the U.S. global war machine, which incites and sustains genocide by supplying the Zionist settler state with arms, with billions of dollars in military aid, with slander toward those who stand with Palestinians. We condemn governmental officials, the media, and university administrations who incited violence and abuse against Palestinians and those in solidarity with Palestine. The violence we have suffered across this country, across the world, and in Palestine is also on our hands, including that of 6-year-old Palestinian American Wadia. Oh, I'm sorry. I just want to make sure that the live stream can hear us because they said that there was sound. The violence we have suffered across this country, across the world, and in Palestine is also on our hands, including that of 6-year-old Wadia, Palestinian American Wadia, who was killed in his home in Chicago. We ask that students and communities around the world escalate their actions and to expose, divest, and sanction the Zionist entity and all who have partaken in this Zionist genocide by supporting it. We demand all elected officials to halt all military assistance to the Zionist state and to pass the ceasefire legislation that Representative Cori Bush has introduced in Congress. We are united in our purpose, more committed than ever to the full liberation of Palestine from the river to the sea, to the end of colonial occupation, land theft, and apartheid, and to return of all exiled Palestinians to their rightful homes. We take inspiration from the martyrs, the brave fighters from all our people in Palestine, and the refugees surrounding Palestine, and from all our steadfast allies. With victory in sight, we call on all our people who value justice and freedom to join us in our call for a free Palestine. Thank you. Thank you all once again. I'd like to now introduce Lemise Deek, who will be speaking on behalf of Al-Awda NY and Palestine Assembly for Liberation. Lemise Deek is a Palestinian internationally practicing attorney based in New York, working in the fields of commercial, political, charities, complex legislation, sanctions and compliance law for individuals, businesses, and nonprofits. Lemise was a frontline defender in the post-9/11 wave of militant repression. She litigated and advised the early terrorism cases which became the case law underpinning U.S. sanctions and compliance regulations, and handled civil, criminal, and administrative litigation against unlawful civil, financial forfeitures, manufactures political charges, attempted shutdowns of mosques, unlawful surveillance, and repressive government practices, and helped decode the multi-agency secret and illegal CIA Israeli-developed demographic surveillance unit, while mobilizing social media and community to help secure a historic victory against illegal government activities. She advises on and crafts policies for government actors, nonprofits, and civil rights groups domestically and internationally, and has been organizing on issues related to Palestinian rights and liberation for over 2 decades as a member of Al-Awda NY and a convener of the Palestinian Assembly for Liberation, and engage in the Palestine-focused litigation and policies challenging anti-Palestinian state, academic, and institutional practices in the U.S. and abroad, and against anti-Palestinian IRA measures in several jurisdictions. Please help me welcome. Okay, we're working on the sounds at this time. And I do want to make a quick correction, or an update actually, that unfortunately, the numbers that we read in our statement when we drafted them, unfortunately had increased to, I believe, over 4,000 Palestinians. As you all know, the Israeli state targeted a hospital. You may not know, but this is something that happened earlier this morning. We're just waiting to hear from people who are online to see if they can hear us. Just testing, we need confirmation from anyone in the chat. One, two. Hello? Okay. Yes? We have confirmation? We hear you on YouTube Live. Okay, we're just gonna go with it. We're gonna, yeah, I think this is good. Hopefully it's good. Some people are saying different things, but we're just gonna, it's doable on YouTube. We're just gonna continue. Sorry if it's too loud. Is it like bearable here? It's too loud? It's fine. Oh, okay, sorry. We don't want to make it too loud for you. Okay, we're just going to keep going. Hopefully this is good. Okay, without further ado, please help me welcome Lemise Deek.
So, ooh, that is really loud. Thank you, Fat and Miriam, Aisha, Shauki, Eli, anybody else I missed. You all have been doing amazing work, not just in preparation for this event, but I know throughout the week, including dealing with all of the campus things, and we are very grateful and proud of you. So another round of applause for all of the organizers, including the Al-Awda organizers, please. And it's wonderful. It is really loud. Let me know if it gets too loud. Just raise your hand and I'll know that means that it's too loud. I grew up, it's too loud. Somebody's telling me it's too loud. How's that better? And still voice, wonderful. I know that folks are exhausted and I wanna point out that I also know folks are in extraordinary pain. Even those who aren't Palestinians are going through a time and experiences that none of us know what to do with or how to deal with or how to recover from, and it's all happening in the context of a massive ongoing war and increased militancy, not just in Palestine and the region, but right here at home, on our streets, in our schools, in our communities. And we are so grateful for your strength. And we are so grateful for this show of beauty in these ugliest times. As so many have spoken about before, and maybe a little detail at this moment, yes, 3,000 Palestinians are confirmed murdered by the Zionist entity known as Israel, but there are over 1,000 under rubble. There has been no water in much of the Gaza Strip in several days. I've lost track if it's 4 or 5. There is no incoming food or medical supplies. The hospitals have completely run out of capacity. The hospital and medical workers are eating bread from their recovery sites, bloodied bread. Babies, children are writing their names, their parents are writing their names on their bodies because most of the families are not surviving and there's nobody to identify them. We've moved past the point of mass graves to mass shrouds. There are not enough shrouds in this tiny little Gaza Strip to bury people individually, each in a shroud. This is the worst that we have seen since 1948, unquestionably. And at the same time, as all of you know, not only is the US and the EU and Canada inciting all of this, but they're also inciting very clearly mobilizing violence against Palestinians and those sympathizing or Palestinian adjacent across New York, using words like barbarism, animals, calling our organizers and rallies terrorists, calling us evil. In all of 75 years of Zionist colonization and incremental, phased, calculated, modern day oriented genocide, not once did I hear a Western mainstream politician or media outlet call Zionists evil or barbaric or terrorists, right? It wasn't evil when they exiled 2/3 of the Palestinian population in 1948, destroying over 70% of our towns and villages. It wasn't evil when they lynched and raped our children and now give testimony about it that circulates, right? That's not evil as they laugh about it. It wasn't evil when they held thousands of Palestinian children and elders in slave camps across Palestine. Biden was alive during those times. Biden was alive when the UN Commission on Palestine, I forget the full name, UNCCP, was operating. Biden was alive when the Red Cross was negotiating the release of Palestinian slaves. And that wasn't evil. And it's not evil when Israeli politicians, Zionist settlers, when American citizens travel to Palestine, burn our towns, my town of Hawara, brag about it on international television, then have dance and song sessions before the very world. That's not evil. That never happened. Shame your eyes, right? It is us who are trying to defend against that. That is evil. And yet, 75 bloody years, and we have had no shortage of Palestinian Gandhis as they'd like us to have. We've had no shortage of Martin Luther Kings and Malcolm X's, and right now we are seeing thousands of Anne Franks give their final dispatches moments before their final moments live for the world to see. And for 75 years, we have begged for the application of international law. For 75 years, countless UN resolutions, the first issue addressed by the UN, 75 years of the Zionist entity and its sponsors saying, no, Israel is exempt. Israeli officials saying, no, international law does not apply to us. Well, if you are the holders of the true narrative, why is it us that are asking for international law and not you? I won't bore you. I was going to read, but we've had a delay. Read the definition of genocide and how it's been applied. Read the definition of war crimes and grave breaches of international law. You could do it. You could Google it. It takes you seconds, right? I will say this, not just at this moment, but for all of the 75 years, taken in combination, Zionist actions have completely fit within the prosecutable definition of genocide, which is why Al-Awda and PAL, the Palestinian Assembly for Liberation, specifically say, yes, it's apartheid. That's the beginning of the sentence. It's apartheid for genocide. It's colonization for genocide. You could see, we have a film that we resurrected on Kufr Qasim, and you could see the people talking to the Israelis. There's some footage, and they say, well, we've been colonized so many times, which is true, the most geomilitarily strategic spot on earth. But you're the only ones that wanted to replace us, right? This is in the 1950s. The Palestinians have been saying this. So under international law, grave breaches of international law, of the obligations of an occupying power, grave breaches such as genocide, the highest and ugliest international law violation, engenders, i.e. gives right to, mind you, a legally protected right to resist. A legally protected right to resist is distinct from a legally protected right to self-defense. It exceeds that, because at this point, the violator, the Zionist, not only has had 75 years of it, but this isn't a one-on-one. This is a policy of ethnic cleansing, of apartheid, of all of these things that are broader, that have broader impact than not just the individual or society, but have a broader impact than on the Palestinian nation, which is why, again, it is a legally protected right to what? Resist. So that's what we say when anybody says, well, what about? And what about all this whataboutism? Well, we also say, you have a problem. We've been begging, come apply international law to us too, and let's see what stands. And so it's not lost on the world now that the vanguards of Western democracy are not only aiding and abetting, but actually inciting genocide, according to intel reports that I trust. It is all the Israeli operation is being coordinated with the US government, aside from the boots on the ground and in our waters, being coordinated, aiding, abetting, inciting, mobilizing, supporting genocide, and it is the axis of resistance, quote unquote, the axis of evil, right, under the new definition, the axis of resistance that's doing what? Undertaking its obligations to stop the highest and ugliest form of war crimes, genocide. It's not lost on the world, right? And so now, more than ever, we're seeing this even in this country, even with the mainstream media, we're seeing more people ask the questions of why. Why, if Israel is a democracy, is it the most militarized society on earth? Why did Shamir in the 1980s call the move towards negotiations and settlements the quote-unquote threat of peace? Why, for this peaceful nation, is military technology one of their key diplomatic tools? Why was the US waiver to allow the PLO embassy open in Washington conditioned on the fact that they do not file a complaint where in the ICC asking for what? International law be applied. Why does Israel have no declared borders? Why do Israelis not have to prove jus sanguis, jus solis, or paperwork, any real material connection beyond a religious book, proving that this is their ancestral homeland? I have DNA from everywhere. I can colonize everywhere, can't I? Why, if Israel is is in a sea of enemies and it's the victim, has not one or once of these sea of Arab states done anything in the past 50 years beyond supporting and protecting the Zionist entity and facilitating the countless massacres of Palestinians, not just in Gaza? And why, if they are the owners of truth, why will they not allow themselves to be challenged? Why have they fired and refused to host us on air? Why? Well, we know why. The US, the EU, Canada, the Western powers, really need and will do anything to hold on to the most important and strategic military base and imperial base in the world. If you look at the history of the world, most empires who've controlled Palestine have in fact controlled the world, right? And this is why Israel is exceptional, right? And I'm sure you all know, but I'm going to repeat for anybody joining again, how special Israel is and how exceptional Israel is, not just under international law, but under moral code. Israel is the longest military occupier in the world. Israel has held the longest siege on a people in Gaza in modern times. Israel is the last active apartheid entity. Israel is the last active colonization for genocide entity. Israel is the only entity on earth that abducts, right, holds captive Palestinian children and babies under military orders by a military tribunal, even without charges, where Palestinian children or babies are tortured at a rate of 97 to 99%. Grown men armed to the teeth, torturing Palestinian babies. This is the exceptionalism that we have offered Israel. And yes, it is an abomination and we have a moral duty to protect Palestinians, but please be clear that we have a moral duty to dismantle and condemn this because it threatens all people. International law is the core, what should be the core of global safety, stability, and peace. Otherwise, chaos would be rampant, and whoever has power can commit genocide and torture children and have slave camps, right? It should be. Aside from the fact that wherever you can name in the world that there's been civil strife, you have found Zionist boots. Whether it was in Guatemala or South Sudan, South Africa, Colombia, El Salvador, you name it. Right on the borders of Venezuela recently, you name it. Exporters. Key diplomatic tool is technology and military. So, which and how can Palestinians forgive not just the 75 years, but what we have seen, and none of us know what to do with it at all. We are lost, and we've been doing this for a long time. How does mercy come and how does settlement come? We are very clear in both the Palestinian Assembly for Liberation and Al-Awda NY. First and foremost, we must dismantle, in Palestine but globally, but certainly in Palestine, every single institution of Zionist, racist supremacy and violence, period. That's what liberation means. Number two, immediate safe return for Palestinian refugees. This government, the US government, was trying to negotiate the return of Palestinian refugees before they realized where their interests, financial and military, lie. Immediate. No conflict has been resolved by first resolving the issue of refugees, period. And on top of that, justice. If you want peace, you have to have justice. And that's not just an empty rhetoric chant that we give at protests. You want people to not take revenge, you give them justice. And justice for Palestinians is the same as justice for people all over the world. Also based in law, also based in precedent. When you hurt me, I go sue you. When you hurt me, I go press a charge, right? You give people justice, there will be peace, there will be mercy. Justice and accountability for Israeli and Zionist war crimes, and full reparations so we establish what was lost, and then we can say equality and democracy because we've established equity. And that is what we mean. That is the definition of the sentence of from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Now you have all of the words, and that's what we ask you to say. What I just said is what Palestinian popular democratic will has been, whether you watch them march on the Gaza ghetto fence, or you watch them try to return home from Haifa or from the borders of Lebanon and Syria in 2008, or whether they were gunned down trying to return from Jordan, or they're rising up in the axis of resistance inside the West Bank. This is what they're demanded, and it's unequivocal. Yes, we don't have a government that reflects us because, hey, we're the exception. We're not allowed democracy. We're not allowed to have elections, right? But the people have spoken loudly, and nobody can say that they haven't heard. So that's step one as to what we do next and what we demand. Be in line with Palestinians. Nobody knows the future, aside from the fact that Palestinians are constantly studying those issues. There's nobody who knows the oppressor like we do. Our relationship is very intimate. We've been saying all of this, precisely what we're saying here to you for 20 years. I'm talking about us as Al-Awda, never mind the Palestinians decades before us. But nobody was listening. So we ask, listen, and center, and demand, and do what? My proposal is you be the heroes for the next generation. You be the people look up to and say, I want to be like that person. And it's not really extraordinary. Look at every system for its parts. Take a moment to pause and strategize and be tactical and be creative. Organize sit-ins. This is the time, if not now, to be cliche, then when? If not for genocide, then for God's sake, for what? And we are genocide that we're watching live on TV and trying to survive the day. On that note, I'm not going to go on too much longer. Divest, sit-ins, direct action, action every day. I will introduce my own personal hero, somebody that has done more for us than countless people all over the world. The Honorable Professor Ilan Pappé, an expatriate of the Zionist entity, a prominent Israeli historian known for being one of the most prolific researchers on the Zionist-Palestinian conflict, somebody I would consider a practical philosopher, and though he produces an immense amount of intellectual product, he also organizes. He had joined, he ran for the Knesset under the Hadassah party, a communist party. He was mobilizing one state movements with Palestinians on a grassroots level, significantly changed the impact on the discourse, and discourse being the highest and lowest stage of policy change. He's created a magnificent shift globally in hearing about Palestine and the situation in Palestine. He's encouraged more nuanced, inclusive, and braver, forward-thinking, progressive discourse and dialogue on Palestine that's made mountains and decades of gains for the Palestinian liberation struggle while acting as a social justice and human rights advocate. Some of his publications have included The Making of the Arab-Israeli Conflict, The Modern Middle East, Israel-Palestine Question, A History of Modern Palestine, One Land, Two Peoples. And I'll stop reading, I was told, but so many books, there are over 20 that even he has lost count. Tonight was supposed to have been a discussion with Ramzi Baroud on one of their latest books, Our Vision for Liberation, I forget the full title. Ramzi Baroud could not join us because his family's building in Gaza was bombed and he lost to count to date 6 family members. On that note, and with no further ado, we please invite Dr. Ilan Pappé to speak.
Thank you, Lamis, for a very kind and empowering introduction. Thank you all the organization that made this event possible. Thank you for all those who have arrived here today and those who even are standing. I hope there's enough seats for everyone. It's a tough act to follow, Lamis. You just want to sit and digest what she so precisely and so bravely has stated. I think that we are obliged to know and recognize the history of modern Palestine, the history of Zionism, the history of the struggle against Zionism, not as an intellectual pursuit, not because some of us are academics or because this event is taking place in an important academic institution. It's because when it comes to trying to struggle with the Zionist propaganda in this country and in any other country, one of the most important weapons the Zionist lobby has is dehistoricizing every event that happens on the ground. They always start at the point that suits them best, and what is so typical of that point that it would totally erase the past. It would take it out of context. And this kind of decontextualization, this idea that you are reporting without an historical background, without a context, whether it's a human context, whether it is a factual context, is the one that you can easily do with a soundbite. You don't need a lecture. All you need is a good soundbite. You need politicians who would, like parrots, repeat this soundbite. And this becomes the only important or valuable information that when you sit in your living room and watch TV, you have to know. And unfortunately for us, who are fighting against it, we cannot fight it with our own soundbites. We need the time and the space, and we should insist on the time and the space. I remember being in New York after 9/11 with my dear friend, late Edward Said, when he received the call. I think it was from, I don't remember, it was not CNN, it wasn't there, but one of the television, main television stations. And he was asked to come and explain what Islam is. And he refused. He said, you're going to give me 2 minutes to explain what is Islam in the context of 9/11. And this is typical to the way that present realities, the genocide that is taking place in Palestine, is being covered by the American media. Out of context, out of history, in sound bites, that what is important about these sound bites is the vocabulary, the language that doesn't require any analysis or any knowledge. Barbarians, savages, terrorists, whatever you want. As long they take 50% of the sentence because the psychological idea that this is what will remain in the minds of people. The adjectives, not information, not explanation, not analysis. Now somehow I can accept that this is what American media is all about, without offending anyone. But when I hear this from American academics, I'm really totally bewildered by the fact that I can see some of my colleagues who are experts on the Middle East using the same sound bites, the same reductionist, orientalist kind of professional language that again is meant to leave in the minds of the listeners and viewers those adjectives. This kind of who's right and who's wrong, who's just and who's unjust. And we don't have this luxury, whether we are Palestinians or we are in the solidarity movement with the Palestinians. Why don't we have this luxury? Because for more than 75 years, a powerful machine of lobbying, a powerful machine of knowledge production that was using Hollywood, that was using the Western academia, that was using money and intimidation, took over the narrative. So when we are trying to counter this narrative, we are facing a huge building that has foundations that go back, in this country, for instance, to the Second World War. When the first and most important American lobbyists for Zionism, by the way, not all of them Jews, very important Christian Zionist evangelical groups were part of this lobbying, they laid the foundation for this idea that emerged in the Second World War, that the West has a problem with Judaism, or anti-Semitism, as they would wrongly call it, but there is a solution. Not anymore the racist solution of Europe, not anymore genocide like in the Holocaust, or anti-Semitic policies like in Eastern Europe. No, there's a new solution. We will gather the Jews in Palestine. We will get Jesus back because of that. We're the only Jew that we are willing to get back. And all the other Jews will not be with us. Who could ask for more? It's a double bill for an anti-Semitic evangelical Jew. It's the wet dream of an evangelical Christian. And this was the foundation, and the foundation was very important because everybody could identify with it, whether you were an evangelical Christian, whether you were a progressive Jew. Of course, you never thought that you yourself had to go to Palestine, but you developed this idea of an insurance state, Israel as being the state to which you will go should this not work in the United States. And on this foundation of this connection between the racism towards Jews in the West, on both sides of the Atlantic, on this foundation, you build one of the most immoral ideas in modern history, that you are fighting the racism against Jews, and there was racism against Jews, there's no doubt about it. You are fighting the religious racism against Jews by destroying Palestine and by creating a Jewish state there. This is what we are struggling with. Now, if we don't have the time, if we don't have the space to explain this, we are getting into trouble when people ask us, don't you think that anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism is the same? Don't you think that Judaism and Zionism is the same? Now, a soundbite answer, no, it is not very helpful. And we need the time, and if people don't give us the time in the media, we go to the alternative media, which will give us a space. If the university does not allow us, even in the new school, to have a proper course on Zionism within the context of studies of genocide and colonialism, we'll do it informally. It doesn't matter, we will not give up either the time or the space to teach ourselves and others of the historical context without which you cannot understand the power of the media and the academia in these countries and in the West to fabricate the reality and to create this false identification with an immoral project that was meant to absolve the Christian world from its anti-Semitism. The second reason we need space, or rather the third, because the first one is that we can't do it in a soundbite, and secondly, we are facing this powerful lobby that created this narrative. The third reason we need space is to make sure that Palestine is not treated as an exceptional case when it comes to human racism and colonialism. I think we did a very good job in recent years, at least in some places, in some sections of the society in the global north. It was already known in the global south, but we succeeded in the global north to create this idea that you can only understand Zionism within the context of settler colonialism. And we explained, as everybody would know about settler colonialism, and Lamis mentioned it, that the idea is not to exploit the colonized people, the idea is to eliminate the colonized people. Elimination can take place in different forms according to the conditions, the circumstances, the capacity of the eliminatory movement, but the vision and the goal is the same. Where we still have a problem, and we should work on it, and I understand psychologically where the problem comes from, is to go further than just talking about settler colonialism. Because there's something that precedes the settler colonial motivation of taking someone else's country and destroying. And Lamis and I had some conversation about it. It is the racism. Even I, as a Jew, sometimes find it difficult to talk about Jewish racism, as if this is a taboo. I can talk about Islamic racism without a problem. I can talk about Christian racism. I can talk about white racism. Somehow, this idea that the Jewish movement can be at the very core, first and foremost, a racist movement that created a racist state is still a kind of conversation you don't even hear among progressive Americans. And I think this is where the focus should be now. Why is racism more important even than settler colonialism? Because first of all, the genealogy of racism in the world is one of the most powerful and significant chapters in human history in modern times. Racism is such a powerful human perception of humanity that it doesn't disappear, as we know. It doesn't disappear. It takes different forms in different places, and there's always a group that seems to be at the top of the league of racism, but there are other groups that are suffering from racism. Racism is dehumanization. Racism is the human act that allows you to regard babies or women or old men or villages or neighborhoods as military hostile spaces that you have the right to treat as if they are military bunkers or military outposts. And it's incredible how Zionism, from the very start, from the very moment the first Zionist settlers arrived in Palestine in the late 19th century, and definitely during the Nakba in 1948, regarded the Palestinian villages, the Palestinian towns, as enemy bases. You can see it in the documentation. By the way, the Zionist documentation is not in the archives. You just go to any Israeli home, and kind of the common books that are in any Israeli Jewish library are books about the history, of course, of Zionism. And you can see that this is how the Palestinians were treated from the very beginning, not only as aliens, but as an army of aliens. And when you have this dehumanization in mind, then nobody is safe from your eliminatory policies, from your genocide, from your ethnic cleansing, and so on. And this dehumanization is so powerful, and this racism is so powerful that it became a DNA of the Israeli Jewish society when it comes to the Palestinians. Again, you cannot explain it in a soundbite. You need almost a course. You don't even have an hour to do this, because there are so many examples for the daily manifestation of the Jewish racism in Israel towards the Palestinians, which result in humiliation, in imprisonment of people without trial, in the destruction of homes, in the burning of trees, of fields, of expulsions, of banishment, you name it. The repertoire is long and is used daily, not when something terrible happens and Israel can use the card of revenge, as it did after Saturday, but on a daily basis without any reaction to anything, but to reaction to the fact that the people you are violating, the people whose rights you are violating are not Jews. And this is not an easy discussion to have, because the moment you enter this discussion about race, Jewish racism, you immediately enter this dangerous waters where people would say to you, wait a minute, you are bordering here on anti-Semitism. How can you talk about Judaism? And you say, I'm not talking about the religion. I'm talking about what people do in the name of the religion. You do it all the time for Islam and Christianity, and even Hinduism, but I'm not allowed to do it for Judaism. And the reason you're not allowed to do it for Judaism, because it will expose a DNA of a settled community that you can only liberate it from, as Lamis said, by totally de-Zionizing both the society and the state. So history, in that respect, is a genealogy of racism. It's not just a history of settler colonialism. It is genealogy of racism in the world and how it connects to racism elsewhere. I'll give you one historical example, which not many people know. In 1938, the United States and Britain convened a conference in Evian, in France, to discuss how can they help the Jewish refugees that began to increase in numbers as a result of the rise of fascism and Nazism in Europe. So there was a discussion. And of course, the Zionist movement that was already there said, oh, we have a solution for that, shift them to Palestine. Some a-Zionist American organizations said, oh, we will try to persuade the American government to take some of these Jewish refugees. The United States refused. And then came the turn of the representative of Haiti to talk. Batistusta, I remember his name because I looked at the protocol. And he said, don't you think that we need a different approach to this whole question? it's not just a question, what would be the destination of the refugee? The question is, don't you see that the racism against black people in America is not different from the racism of the Nazis towards the Jews? Don't you think that all of you here should have a discussion, first of all, about racism before you even discuss Nazism, because before you even discuss Jewish refugees? And then, I assure you, he said, we will all find the best solution that would not violate other people's rights, he said to the Zionists, as you suggest in doing in Palestine, but something that would uproot the problem rather than keep it alive and just deal with the symptoms. Not surprisingly, the representative of the United States asked that the representative of Haiti would be removed from the meetings. Remember, this is the 30s. America was ripe with racism on the most brutal and possible level. So this genealogy of racism that the Palestinians have been suffering on a daily basis since the first Zionist settlers arrived in Palestine is the wider historical context for the Palestinian resistance. So they're not only resisting settler colonialism, they are resisting a racist state that is commodified and accepted in the global north as the only non-racist state in the Middle East. It is the only racist state in the Middle East, according to its constitution, which is constitutional law. It's not the written constitution, but according to its constitutional law, it's racist. According to what the children learn in school, it's racist. And according to the practices on a daily basis towards the Palestinians, it's racism. So the Palestinian struggle is not just against liberation. It's not just waiting for liberating Palestine and decolonizing it. And we're not just decolonizing knowledge about settler colonialism. The struggle is against racism, because racism does not rest until it gets rid of those it regards as inferior, as inhuman, as people who don't have the same right as you to exist. This is one part of the history. I think if I had, and I don't have the time, I would have gone on and on about it in order to get the context. There are two additional points I would like to make. One is that if we don't have all the time in the world to go to the more profound history of what motivated Zionism as a settler colonialist state, a movement, as a racist movement, if we don't have the time to go with people through all the history, through the ethnic cleansing of 48, the ethnic cleansing in 1967, at least we should demand the time for what happened in historical Palestine in the last 3 or 4 years to understand why the Hamas in Gaza felt that it could not be passive anymore. As we know, for all the ceasefires after brutal Israeli attacks since 2006, the Hamas was willing to go for a hudna of 10 years. It was willing to build the Gaza Strip. But we have to remember what happened in Israel since 2009. There began the Netanyahu era. Netanyahu is in power since 2009 in Israel. He individually is not that important. What is important is that in order to remain in power, he has to galvanize among the racist society the most racist elements in it. And all his political power is based on messianic, it's not even Zionist, it's messianic Jewish groups that see the Palestinians or the killing of Palestinians as a religious imperative, and seeing actually any Jew who is secular and is not part of the effort to eliminate the Palestinian as bad as the Palestinians. So they are also attacking Jews whom they don't like, not just the Palestinians. And that messianic coalition is in power in Israel since 2009, and using the powers it has as a government to make life for the Palestinians unbearable. creating a ghetto in Gaza in 2009, which is far worse than anything that happened before. I won't go into all the details I know you're familiar with, but don't forget what they are doing to other Palestinians. Incremental killings. Since 2009, there's incremental killings of Palestinians on a daily basis in the West Bank. There is the beginning of what we can see now among the Palestinians inside Israel. The nurturing of criminal Palestinian gangs, or criminal gangs among the Palestinians. Most of them were collaborators with the Secret Service that were extracted from the West Bank and Gaza after Oslo. They are being armed, and they are becoming criminal gangs that are killing the Palestinians themselves among the Palestinians in Israel. Each Palestinian group is treated by this particular coalition in a different way in order to try and accelerate a process that the liberal Zionists were happy with the same vision. For liberal Zionism, there was always time in order to continue the Nakba. There was no need for massive expulsion, they said. There's no need for drastic action. We have the power, and eventually the idea of having much of Palestine as possible, with as few Palestinians in it as possible, will come true. We have the power, we have the system. These people have a direct line to their God, and they don't believe in such a pace. They want to accelerate the pace. And if Gaza was the first place you would feel the difference between what happened before 2009 and after 2009. It is in Gaza that you felt what it meant to have a messianic government and not just a regular Zionist government in power. And that kind of policy since 2009 has pushed the Hamas to do whatever it could, because any other action would have meant slow death in the ghetto of Gaza. And when you get out of the ghetto, you burst out because you cannot survive if you don't do that. And I think that's very important. The last point I want to make this evening is the one thing that dehumanization and racism is doing to us is to forget who the Palestinians are. We keep talking about them as victims, as people who are being born and colonized and killed. One particular historical aspect of my work that I enjoyed more than anyone else and any other aspect was reconstructing the life in Palestine before 1948. It's not only important to write about how life was destroyed, it's important to write about what was destroyed. This is the best antidote to anybody who talks about the Palestinians as savages, as terrorists, as inhuman and barbarians. Palestine before 1948 was a society that if you had it today in the Middle East and beyond, you would have thought that you had seen the best that humanity can offer. This was a society that respected people's religion. Druze, Muslims, and Christians, and even Jews did not live in separate villages. They all lived in the same villages. They all celebrated each other's festivities. They all mourned each other's death and suffering. There's a great book by Usama Makdisi called The Ecumenical Frame about that particular society. Coexistence was not a dirty word as it became in Oslo to allow the Israelis to have occupation by other means. Coexisting was a genuine way of life of people who did not think that who you are in terms of your identity is important, but who you are in terms of humanity is what it counts. As Eli Habibi said when he wrote about his street in Haifa, Abbas Street, said, I didn't know until 1948 who was a Christian and who was Muslim. Since 1948, I knew exactly who belonged to which religion. We never had it, he said, in Palestine before 1948. But there was something else in Palestine before 1948 that we should tell people. And this is the connection between the people and the ecology and the nature. Palestine was blessed with streams of fresh water. Every village had streams and wells with drinkable water. Israel destroyed all these streams, dried them out. It did the same to many villages in the West Bank and Gaza after 1967. Before 1948, this idea that was repeated stupidly by the president of the EU, that Zionism bloomed the desert, actually was a blooming country that Zionism turned into a desert. That's what we should remember. And there's so much information about it. There's so much information. It's so important to reconstruct the solidarity that the people have shown, the compassion, ta'atuf in Arabic, that they had one for another. By the way, that solidarity and that compassion made sure that somehow hundreds of thousands of Palestinians still remained in Palestine despite of the Nakba, because they were hosted by the Palestinians who were not expelled. In Nablus, in Jenin, Tulkarem, in the Galilee, all the internal refugees were taken in by the communities who catered for them and made sure that the number of refugees was much smaller than it could have been had the Zionist plan been fully completed. And finally, and no less important, I beseech you to read a book by Laurie Allen, because this is something so important about the negotiations between the Palestinian politicians and leaders from 1918 until 1948 with the international community. It starts in 1919 when President Wilson sends a commission of inquiry to Palestine to find out what the people of Palestine want in the future. And they hear the following thing. They say, you, President Wilson, bring two ideas that actually we like after living under Ottoman rule for 400 years. You bring the idea of self-determination, yes, especially after the Ottoman Empire became Turkish and less attentive to other people's identities. We like the idea of self-determination, not necessarily for Palestinians. At that time, they thought maybe there would be an old Syrian identity, an old Arab identity. They had different ideas of how to implement self-determination. And the second idea you're bringing is democracy. You know, the idea that the majority will decide the future and so on. We would like to implement these two principles in Palestine, they tell President Wilson's inquiry commission. So let's have a vote in Palestine about the identity of the country, and let's recognize Palestine and the right of Palestine for self-determination. From 1919 to 1948, whether it's American, British, or international commission, the Palestinians who try to say, okay, we accept these ideas, they are all, one delegation after the other is telling them, basically you're right, and we might implement it in Syria, in Iraq, in Egypt. In your case, unfortunately, we cannot do that. From the very beginning, the international community, led by Britain and the United States, sends a message to the Palestinians that whatever they would want in the name of democracy, in the name of self-determination, in the name of international law, cannot be, unfortunately, implemented in the case of Palestine, and they would have to accept it. No wonder the Palestinians do not accept it. No wonder they don't accept it today. But again, these are the historical layers that explain why international law does not apply to Palestine to this very day. It doesn't start with the occupation of 1967. It doesn't even start with the ethnic cleansing of 1948. There was a decision, the moment the world, especially the West, decided that what it regards as moral, what it regards as international law, what it regards as international morality, the moment it decided it was also the moment it decided that Palestine is an exceptional case. And we are fighting against this exceptionalism, and we are pointing out that this exceptionalism bred the racism, the settler colonialism, the ethnic cleansing, and the genocide. And we should not let the events of last week lead us to forget the wider context, the wider picture. Because we will be back with this picture, however the horrible things that are happening in Palestine would end. We will be back fighting. And I have a dreadful feeling that actually the Israelis are going now to slow down, to decelerate the occupation of the Gaza Strip, the destruction of Gaza. They would move to the typical incremental genocide, ethnic cleansing mode of them, because they learned that the international media is not interested if a huge hospital is being blown up, if it's only few people that are being killed or ethnically cleansed, and they would move back. That's why they already told the Israelis, the Israeli government told the Israeli public, be ready that what we promised you, the elimination of the Hamas, is a project for years, not for months and not for weeks. This is very, very worrying, in fact, because that means that they are sure that they can go back to the same methods that already has destroyed so much of Palestine and so many of the Palestinians. And if we cannot, in the new school, ask the academics to help us to counter this fabrication, if we cannot ask intelligent politicians and intelligent media people in this country to stop behaving like idiots and ignorance and tell us that they don't understand what goes on in Israel and Palestine. It's very complex, it's very delicate. We should never desist from continuing pressuring them and talk to their intelligence, to their humanity, and to their basic self-image as people who are against racism, injustice. You cannot be against injustice, racism, and colonialism if you support Zionism. This is the message, and we should never desist one moment for putting it there to anyone who doesn't understand it or doesn't have a modicum of decency in them to admit this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Pappé. I want to build up from your last 3 points. When the Israel and Africa Summit was being planned in 2018, we had asked for a meeting with the Togo representative to the UN. We said to them, well, you understand the risks of miring yourself with the Zionist entity, all the surveillance and these conflicts that only they can solve. And they said, oh, yes, we're well aware. Well, what do you want out of this? 2 things. 1, the military technology, and number 2, the agricultural technology, to which we said, we can't help you with the military, you wouldn't be in this position. And the agricultural was the area that we can talk about. But this is an area that's very well hidden, yet used as a diplomatic tool globally alongside the military, which clearly is failing. We love you. I'm going to couch a few of them together so we can get you moving. You have been one of the most, not just solid voices, but you've made real measurable material gains for the Palestinian liberation struggle. And as Mohammed al-Qudus said, it's not our fault that our colonizers knock on our door and say, we're Jewish, open up. And conversely, it's not your fault that you happen to be Jewish, but it is your fault that you came to be an anti-Zionist. So, and I understand and heard, it was moving to hear you say that even you struggle to talk about Jewish racism and violence. So how did you come to that, and how did that struggle manifest for you, and how did you overcome that to the point of becoming one of the first people to articulate what was happening in Palestine to be genocide very many years ago?
Yeah, it's a journey. I think the most important thing about conversions like this, there is no epiphany. There's no moment of awakening. There's a journey that you undertake as a person out of the very warm embrace of an ideology that promises you privileges, promise you self-righteousness, and very much a position of superiority in the West. I think that the stations have to do with your ability to, first of all, intimately meet the people who are the victims of the kind of ideology in which you grew. I was fortunate from a very early stage to meet Palestinians, which is not always easy for Israeli Jews, and to hear their side of the story, if you want. It also helped, of course, that I decided to pursue my studies outside of Israel. And I chose an Arab supervisor for my PhD. So I can build the puzzle. I cannot find, I wish I could, because then we could have a program of how to deprogram Zionists. But I don't have this deprogramming diskette with me, or whatever you would call it today. But I do feel that getting out of the country, being able to meet Palestinians on more equal footing, would leave very few people, I think, in the same place they were, even if, like me, they grew into this indoctrinated educational, cultural, and political system. Still, I'm aware how few of us are there across the Rubicon, so to speak. I am still studying this because I do believe that there is something there maybe I'm missing in order to work on the Israeli Jewish public even better or more effectively. But I think I kind of decreased the efforts in the last 10 or 15 years because of a strategic understanding, which I'm sure you share with me on this. I don't think that Palestine would be liberated or decolonized because a vast majority of Israeli Zionist Jews would be de-Zionized. Apartheid South Africa did not cease to exist because a lot of whites suddenly became anti-racist. Although when you go now to South Africa, every white person you meet tells you I was against apartheid. And you ask them, well, there were so many of you, why did it take so long? No, I think that we will de-Zionize Israel without this internal changes. So I'm not saying it's not important. It is important, but it becomes less important for me because I realize that this is not the most important factor. The most important factor is the continuance of Palestinian resistance and resilience, and the international pressure on Israel that hopefully one day would raise to the same level that it reached in the pressure on apartheid South Africa. I would rather invest my energies there than invest my energies in changing the Israeli Jewish perception of reality, although I'm still doing that as well. I'm still doing that as well. And therefore, so I must say, I know the stations in the journey that you're asking why. I still don't have a clear idea. I still think it's just basic humanity, a basic human constitution. A moral constitution cannot leave you indifferent. But that's not a good enough reason, because I don't think all the Israelis are satanic people, and therefore they do not have this. I know the power of indoctrination, of manipulating fear. But one day maybe I'll find the reason why I was able to escape, a production. Maybe every production line has some flawed products. I'm a flawed product of the Israeli education system. There's no doubt. I'm a total failure this production line. In fact, the principal of the school I went to said to our Arabs, he assures the Israelis that I'm one of the very few flawed products of the system. Everyone else is leaving the school as they want them to leave the school. So maybe I should look at that production line and find the faults to create more faulty products like myself.
Thank you, Dr. Pappé. You know, Palestinians actually like to brag. You know, the Arabs have what each nation is most famously known for. Palestinians love that we are known in the region for being the most hospitable amongst the Arab nations. I like to tell people that I'm probably one of the last generations that remembers not only celebrating Christian holidays alongside Muslim holidays, but also are Palestinian. We didn't conceive of them as just Jewish, because that's what the Israelis never said, hey, it's the Israeli iftah, right? And a Yahudi iftah. They don't say ana Sahyoni, they don't say ana. But when it came to the Palestinian Jews, and we're from Hawara, Nablus, we didn't think of them as Yahud, we thought of them as Palestinians who are also Jewish. And Palestinians would actually, Muslims and Christians, would go to the Palestinian rabbis for witchcraft, interestingly enough. And the hope is, and what we raise as our points, is that we can rebuild that eventually under an equation of justice. But we'd also like to know, you've articulated in your book our vision for liberation, which is available online. We ask that you please pick it up, is how you address and deal with this. And I'd like to also, if you can, Candid, maybe go back to the Palestine exception began before the Holocaust in 1919. If you could tell us a little bit about the cause for that exceptionalism as well at the same time.
Yeah, I think that one good place to start with is to remind ourselves that Zionism began as a Christian project long before it was a Jewish project. Ever since the 17th and 18th century, evangelical Christianity associated the creation of a Jewish state with the end of times. And this was very, very important because it laid the foundation for exceptionalism on a religious basis. Then this exceptionalism was met with the emergence of ideological Jewish movement in Eastern Europe and Central Europe, first of all genuinely trying to struggle with anti-Semitism and wishing the Jews to be nationalism, which no harm in it, basically. But when the two movements met together, they orientated the whole idea of dealing with the religious ideas and the modern idea of nationalism through the colonization of Palestine. And in order for that colonization to be an exceptional colonization, namely one that cannot be decolonized, in order to make that, it was very important to defeat any framing of the Zionist project in Palestine as colonialism. And with the help of leaders of evangelical Christianity, with the help, unfortunately, of the left in Europe, because of the stupid assumption that Zionism will also be a socialist haven, when you have religious fanatics on the left combining with religious fanatics in Christianity, it's very difficult to talk sense. And this kind of Israel is becoming the paragon society that the left has dreamt of, that Christian Zionists have dreamt of, began also, and they were the last one, by the way, began also to affect Jews. Because if you look at the Zionist ideology, let's say before the Holocaust, take 1939. 90% of the Jews in the world do not believe in Zionism in 1939. 90% of evangelical Christians do believe in Zionism. A lot of people in the socialist movement believe in Zionism. That they see the kibbutz as you know, as Christians see the return of the Messiah. Collective, I know, and it was very collective. I mean, I have the stories of my mother. She was not allowed to wear her earrings. She had to share it with people. So people thought, you know, this is it. Well, the end of time, or as Fukuyama would call it, secretly the end of history. And this kind of utopian ideas, whether religious or socialist, were creating this immunity, I think. Now, that might have not have held water had it not been for the Holocaust. There's no doubt about it. The Holocaust was very cleverly manipulated by the Zionist movement. One should rather say the Holocaust memory was very cleverly manipulated by the Zionist movement to make sure that the doubts that began to creep, and a lot of doubts began to appear among socialists and Christians and so on, when more news came from Palestine, what it means for the Palestinians to have a Zionist organization, to make sure that these doubts do not turn into a counter-movement and to maintain the exceptionalism, Israel very cleverly created this association between the Holocaust and the answer to the Holocaust. And I'll give you one powerful example for this. The West was quite at a kind of a moment of hesitation how to deal with West Germany after the occupation of Germany. Should Germany, that is West Germany, be accepted to the family of civilized nations so shortly after the Holocaust? And the Zionist movement later Israel interfered in this debate. They said, if you can assure total support, unconditional support for the Zionist project and the state of Israel, we, the Israelis, we represent all the survivors, which was not true. We represent the victims, which is not true, never mind. As the ultimate representatives of the Jews who were killed or survived the Holocaust, we will give absolution to the new Germany. I remember talking with Israeli diplomats who were involved in this project, and I said, did you have to be the first state that recognized the new Germany? Couldn't be the third or the fourth? I mean, given the fact that you represent the Jewish people, don't you find it a bit absurd that you were the first state to say there's a new Germany? Even if you were the second, it would be a bit better. Now, the reason they were the first to do that was because they rightly thought so. It would maintain their exceptionalism. The Israeli lobby, and for the Zionist lobby, all the time is working, unlike, the pro-Palestinian, pro-Arab lobby works in the afternoon. I'm sorry to say that. The Israeli Zionist lobby works 24 hours a day. 24 hours a day. And they're always looking for the next manipulation because the facts are against them. The reality is all the time against them. They cannot sustain their moral arguments. They keep kind of pushing back. So they have to find something else. When the Holocaust, it seemed like the Holocaust is not working, they moved to anti-Semitism. After 9/11, the war against terror. Now they're bringing back the Holocaust, definition of the Holocaust. It will not work, by the way, contrary to what they think. God knows, but they will keep thinking of how to immunize and keep this exceptionalism. What is hopeful and dreadful at the same moment is the fact that the Israeli public is tired of this exercise and wants to have a government that cannot be defined as democratic, is not defined as liberal, is not defined as part of the Western world. They don't care anymore. And this is both helpful because I think there's a limit to how you can commodify these lunatics as democratic. It's terrifying because these are the lunatics who will make life even worse for the Palestinians. So we are at this impossible juncture.
Thank you, Dr. Pappé. We'll try not to exhaust you too much longer. I'm going to ask one question and remind people to submit their questions through the QR code. If you have to leave before your question is answered, you could watch the answer on live stream. My final question is building on this commodification of the Holocaust, of anti-Semitism. You know, the defamation and almost criminalization of using the term the Zionist lobby, and now, for many years, but especially now, the genocide and the incitement and aiding and abetting of genocide focuses on just Hamas, nothing else but Hamas. I think a lot of people here would like to hear a little bit about what is the potential response of students, academics, other people in answering this reduction of 75 years, 100+ years really, of resistance to this, just to Hamas and the demonization of the Palestinian people.
Yes, I think it's a very good question. The easy way to begin, but that's just the beginning, I think, of the conversation, is to question whether Israel at all can take the high moral ground on this. And you already mentioned it. And that's very important. First of all, to say, who are you to question the morality of your victims, given what you have been doing to them? But I think no less important is to remind, especially in this place, the New School is a good place to begin with, that in the 60s and in the 70s, there was admiration for anti-colonialist movements. There was total support for decolonization, people who struggle against empires, against oppressors, were rightly hailed as heroes, and every progressive or person who thought of themselves as progressive was supporting this kind of human resistance to oppression. Palestinian resistance, and that's part connects to your previous question. It's quite incredible how the Israeli framing of themselves and of Zionism affected the way the Palestinian resistance was looked at, even at the time when decolonization was at its height and popular in places like Africa and Asia. Even before anybody said, well, most of the Palestinian resistance fighters are religious Muslims and therefore they're like the Taliban and so on. Even before that, there's nothing new. I mean, Layla Khaled, Rassan Kanafani, all the heroes of the Palestinian liberation movement were secular, many of them Christian Palestinians. Don't think for one moment that they were framed in the Western media in any different way than the Hamas. Don't anyone let you say that, it's because of the Hamas that we are now using this language and this framing. That's not true. You always talked about the legitimate Palestinian armed struggle against liberation as terrorism. You were willing eventually to say that Mandela is not a terrorist. You were willing to glorify the FNN, even the Viet Cong eventually, not to mention the Mao Mao. But the PLO was always terrorist in your eyes. Whereas compared, by the way, to all these liberation movements, it was struggling for a colonization in their own land, not even a foreign occupation coming from the outside. This is something that is important, and I always expected the universities in America to show the way on this. And they can easily do it, and they're not doing it, by changing the location of the discipline in which they study the Palestinian resistance. They don't. Look at any university in America, they don't teach the Palestinian anti-colonial struggle within the study of anti-colonial struggles. It's incredible. In 2023, not in New York, not in Berkeley, not in Harvard, not in Yale, You can take a course of the Palestinian resistance as part of the history of anti-colonialism. I really think that I'm the only person in the world who has such a module. I really think, I may be wrong, I hope I'm wrong. I teach the Palestinian resistance as part of the history of anti-colonialism. Needless to say, the Israeli embassy in London called my university and said it's an anti-Semitic course and so on. Who cares? Yeah, who cares what they say? Who cares what they want? Not one professor in America would be fired if he or she or they, I'm in America, right? Will teach the anti-colonialist struggle of the Palestinians in a major course of anti-colonialism. You should demand it. You are students, you are clients. You should ask it from the institutes for which you are paying to be truthful and do that. So I think this is something that it connects, and with this I would add to the fact that yes, the anti-colonialist movement in the Arab world sometimes moves to more religious aspects when the most secular or leftist liberation struggles fail to deliver. Sometimes they work in conjunction, together. This is the Arab world. The Arab world is both traditional, it's religious, it's secular, it's multicultural, it has everything. And it navigates sometimes more successfully, sometimes less successfully, between tradition and modernity, but this is the Arab world. And you have to let the Arab world to find its way of doing it without intervention. Every imperialist intervention, every Zionist intervention turned a long tradition of 1,000 years of navigating carefully between tradition, modernity, outside influence and inside influence, turned it into a battlefield. Without the intervention and without Zionism, the Arab world, and we know from the history of the Islamic civilization, will find a way of giving back the true meaning of coexistence to the people.
Thank you, Dr. Pappé, and the SJP students who will now moderate the question and answer session. And for the SJP, as you come up, on behalf of Al-Awda and Dr. Pappé, I don't know where you went, right behind you, we'd like to offer you 2 signed books of Our Vision for Liberation, which was the original topic and impetus behind this. And again, please get online and read the book. This is the time to start planning for what a liberated, safe, peaceful Palestine looks like.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Pappé. Thank you, Lamis, and for all who submitted their questions. So me and Fatin will moderate. We've tried to concise some of the questions for the sake of time. And there were a couple of hits. So I guess the main question that everyone seems to have, it was, what is the name of the author of the book you mentioned, Reconstructing Life in Palestine Before 1948? And another part of that is, where can we find your book with Ramzi other than Amazon?
Okay, the first one is easy. I'm not sure about the second one. The first one, the name is Usama Makdisi, and it's called The Ecumenical Frame. It does not only reconstruct the life in Palestine, but in the Mashrak, in the Eastern Mediterranean, because Palestine was an organic part of that part of the Arab world. In fact, it was typical to the whole area of the Eastern Mediterranean to have this mosaic of live and let live according to one's own community and so on. So that's the name. As for, I wish Ramzi is dealing with all these issues. He would know where you can find the book outside of Amazon. I promise to somehow convey this information.
I looked it up already, so I can help you out.
Okay.
If you want to buy from Harvard, there's Harvard Bookstore, Clarity Press. I actually asked that question because I don't like Amazon, and I was wondering. But yeah, thank you so much. The full name of the book that you mentioned is Age of Coexistence, the Ecumenical Frame and the Making of the Modern Arab World. Thank you. So the second question is, for the first time, the synthesis of this question is about there being, I actually saw Mustafa Baruti saying this earlier today, that it seems like the population of the Palestinians in all of historic Palestine is reaching 50% in comparison of the entire population. And this is why he believes what is happening in Gaza is happening in the way that it is. This question is asking, will Israel accept a constitution like the United States that all citizens are equal, given this trend?
First of all, Mustafa Barghouti is right. Demographically, the Palestinians inside historical Palestine are now half of the overall population. It is also true that the Israeli policies, and even before that, the Zionist policies, were aimed at downsizing as much as possible the number of Palestinians in Palestine. Their failure is the greatest success, of course, of Palestinian resistance and resilience. The fact that 50% of the population are still Palestinians is not because this is part of the Zionist vision of Palestine. It's because of the failure of the Zionist vision of Palestine. We should recount our successes and not just our defeats and failures. As for Israel accepting the idea of one democratic state or one state with equal rights for everyone, Israel as a political system, Israel as a society will never accept it. However, this is not the most important question to my mind. The most important question is, how do we force Israel to accept it? Not whether it will accept it, but how do we force it to accept it? And we know from history the combination of a liberation struggle on the ground, sanctions from the outside, solidarity in the world, eventually, in many places, result in liberation. The problem is, it's a long process, and we need to embrace ourselves for long processes, and for some of us, the dividends of these efforts will not be visible in our lifetime, and we have to accept it. I always say that the activism is not of how much did you change the reality, because you never know, but how much did you do in order to change the reality. And there's no doubt about it. Even regimes eventually do not live forever. I really think that even before 7th of October 2023, very serious cracks in the edifice of Zionism began to unfold and show themselves. I wrote, before the 7th of October, I wrote an article and saying this is the beginning of the end of Zionism. I don't think differently after last week. In fact, I'm even more convinced after last week. This is the end. The end, as happened in apartheid South Africa, is a very dangerous period. The regime fights for its life. And this is a powerful regime, a cruel regime, and that's why we have these mixed feelings. On the one hand, we see suffering, barbarity, inhumanity, but it's part of a process that actually has seeds of optimism for the future. And it's very difficult emotionally to deal with the suffering as an indication that something better is coming. But historically, I have no doubt that this is what we are experiencing. We experience cruelty and brutality because a certain regime is losing it. Not because it's winning, but because it's losing.
Briefly, I must agree with Dr. Pappé. I think every Palestinian and its allies this week have been telling themselves the world is finally waking up, but at what cost? Another question that we have that's been reiterated in similar words over and over is, as a student and faculty, both separately and collectively, are struggling to speak up about the Palestinian people, especially at our institutions, since most universities have condemned the actions of Hamas, but not the atrocities of Israel. Some student organizations are receiving threats for protesting, and many students are scared of being expelled. How, as students, can we further our activism in safe and proper ways?
Yes, I like this question because I'm the director of the Center for Palestine Studies at the University of Exeter in Britain, and my students are now experiencing the same kind of threats, the same kind of problems. First of all, I think that we have sometimes to be a bit more patient. The atmosphere that is now prevailing, unfortunately, give it to the Israelis, it will change. It will change. I mean, the Israeli brutality would unfold, and as I say, unfortunately, in all its power. So I think that the kind of knee reaction of authorities, university management, and so on, with the solidarity with Israel, will wane. I don't think it will be there all the time. That's one thing. So if you don't find the legal assistance to do it, if you are in particularly vulnerable position, don't become a shaheed on this. Wait a little bit, because I think these things will change. That's first. So I think we should distinguish, that's what I said to my students. I said, distinguish between the problems that are happening this week, you know, and see whether they still persist in the next few weeks. And then take action, legal action, industrial action, and so on. Don't react directly. My dear friend Carmen Abulsi, who was in Beirut as a lieutenant in 1982, gave me a very good metaphor for this. She said, when we were in the bunker in Beirut, and the Israeli airplanes bombed us, carpet bombed us, it was stupid to get out of the bunker, because we wanted to show the Israeli aeroplanes that we are fighting them. It was much better to wait until the bombing was over, and then to strategize and think what to do next, because Beirut was about to be occupied by the Israeli forces. And I think we are, you know, this is not a civil, you are not being under barrage, you are not being bombed, but these are not easy times for you, I understand it. But I think, first of all, don't judge everything according to this week. I would wait a little bit and see, and of course, if it continues, the legal struggle, the public struggle, and recruiting those academics with tenure who have nothing to worry about as far as the future, is a campaign that we should all take over. Most of it is bullying. And you deal with bullying without being afraid of the bully. That's the first thing you know about bullying. Now, if the bully is the university management, it's easier said than done, I know. But university management can also be bullies. And because they're bullies, they are also not so brave when it comes to being faced in court or in the public domain. We have to remember this. I know from my own experience, believe me, the Israeli embassy has tried to close my center since I built it in 2007, tried to bring to my dismissal, and they did not succeed because we all in Exeter did not cave in. We did not cave in, and this is something you can do. But strategize, don't go out of the bunker when they're bombing, and you will survive, and this kind of horrific sympathy and license to kill that the Israelis are getting from the administration, from the public domain or the media will not be sustained for long, because what are the Israelis going to do next that would look like self-defense? They've already exhausted every possible manipulation of claiming that what they are doing is self-defense. They're running out of options there. Again, these are horrible things. I don't want to be so tactical, but we have to be sometimes tactical about these things as well.
I do want to support that and add, strategy, planning, preparation is very critical, as is what Dr. Pappé raised earlier, is indignation, as is having counsel to go to. There are many places where there is a centered, and we'll issue that again, attorneys who can advise on how you can respond in a calculated way. Forgive me for glossing over your introduction, Dr. Pappé. I was getting this sign. But Dr. Pappé himself was exiled and removed from Haifa University, where he was teaching as well, and has continued to be one of the most prolific and internationally respected by anti-Zionists and Zionists alike internationally. And this is a fleeting moment. We will win. Our estimations, or I should say my estimations, is it's far sooner than it is later, actually. And you will win, and you will have the moral high ground, and you will be remembered by history, and planning in a calculated way is absolutely critical.
Thank you. Actually, following up on Lamise's point, there is a question that asks, as someone who has spoken out, did you get personally excommunicated from immediate family for your views? Can you talk more about how to frame the claims of rape and torture? The claims of rape and torture.
In what context?
It's really claimed that
Oh, the rape,
members
the
had
rape
raped
and
and
torture. Okay,
tortured.
so these are two different questions.
Yeah.
Let's do something with rape and torture. I felt a bit worried about that. Okay. As for my personal, yes, I mean, I was hesitant to talk about it because really it was I was a five-star victim compared to what Palestinians are going through. You lose your immediate, not immediate family, but you lose your close family. Of course, you lose your society's health connection. For a while, you don't have a reference group because you're not a Palestinian, so you don't have the Palestinian society support you, but you can't be a member of the Jewish society because they have expelled you. So it takes time to build the confidence I did build in my relationship with the Palestinian community. I didn't expect immediately to be accepted. I think you have to earn this confidence. You don't, just the fact that you were expelled by your own tribe, if you want, doesn't mean that you immediately are accepted. It's a process, and you have to be very patient, and as I say, win the legitimacy, which I now definitely have, and that really was more important than anything else. So yes, being excommunicated by Zionists now looks to me like a great thing, rather than a suffering. I recommend it to many of my Israeli Jews as a great therapy. As I said to them many times, you will stop lying to yourself, you will be totally liberated, and you will finally, in your lifetime, be at peace with yourself. Be Zionized now. As for the second question, I haven't seen any evidence for rape. I'm very conscious that definitely those who were part of the commando section of the Hamas would not do this. very clear, they're very disciplined, they very know what they do. We have to remember that, surprisingly, the border was so open, so many other young men came from Gaza and took part in the operation, which is not what the Hamas planned. They didn't plan to come with civilians with them. But they came because it was so easy. I don't know exactly how they behave. One has to wait and see. So this is all I can say about that. Definitely the rage, especially of someone who's not a disciplined member of the resistance, could have taken form in different ways. I wouldn't be surprised if it did. I don't condone it, of course. But again, I say, first of all, we don't know enough about it. What we know is that that kind of rage and the way it was manifested was the result of people being ghettoized and caged for so many years in inhuman conditions. So, Norman Finkelstein, and maybe it was not a bad idea, he compared it to the very famous rebellions of slaves in America that did massacre white communities or Native Americans who reacted in such a way. This is part of what you can expect every now and then, very rarely, but it happens when you are exercising inhuman genocide and oppression and colonization of people.
To add, if that's okay, as I noted earlier, the way that you resolve this is let's go to the ICC, let's have a tribunal. The answer to that is not genocide and to drop more bombs on an area smaller than New York City than you did on Afghanistan. Not that that's appropriate in 1 year over the course of 6 days.
And we're going to attempt to close out with this question for the sake of time. I know there were many questions about US imperialism and democracy, but I think people want to know that you suggest waiting for now. However, people in Gaza are out of water and maybe cannot wait a week. How do you sort through that emotionally, and what are some de-escalating measures that you personally believe would be the most efficient?
The two are not mutually exclusive. What I said was a strategy for students. There's no doubt as activists, we should act immediately and urgently. There's no doubt about it. We should pressure in any way we have through our members, those representatives in the House and senators, try to get to the media and demand an immediate stop for the genocide. We should insist on journalists using the right language, describing and covering in the right way. This is something, of course, that should not be stopped for a minute, and many of you are doing that. But I think that this is something that is almost obvious. It's just the other sort of layer of engagement is the ones that I talked about. I must say that for the first time, at least in Britain, you are able to hear some other voices in the mainstream media. I think that even in the United States, there are more different voices I'm hearing now in the mainstream media. Not enough, there's no doubt about it. It means that some people are a bit more confused than the Israelis would like them to be. I agree, we don't have time to solve their confusion. This is not our role, but we should kind of take advantage of that and make sure that the right information is there. And the most important thing here is the language, really, to my mind. We cannot go and fight the Israelis, but we can go and use the right language. The right language is very, very important, and we may prove the very famous adage that sometimes the pen is mightier than the sword, or in this case, the keyboard is mightier than the sword. You have the keyboard, it's a weapon, use it. It has an accumulative effect and even an urgent effect on the reality. And work day or night on this, because as I'm saying, the Israeli recruited 1,000 students alone in America to take over the cyberspace, and they are bombarding, as they bombard Gaza with bombs, they are bombarding the networks with misinformation, false, fake news, in order to prevent pressure. So if they are using so much energy, they are afraid that something can filter through from the reality on the ground, which will change hearts and minds of Americans. And we should help this to show that they are right in the fear and make it a reality. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pappé, and I want to reiterate to any student that is worried, especially about the online repercussions of their activism, that any employer or academic institution would take one look at these Google results, and if they had critical thinking, would know that it's a propaganda-based website. So please do not hold your hearts too tight and worry about speaking out on the truth, because it is only the truth that will eradicate the revisionist history that these institutions attempt to partake in.
I have only one sound, I don't like sound bites, as you notice. I have one sound bite for you. When it comes to the truth, the Palestinians have nothing to lose.
Thank you, Dr. Pappé, for joining us today. Thank you, Lamis and Fatin from Al-Awda NY. Thank you to the organizers of the New School SJP, and for creating a channel where these voices can be heard.
Thank you. And Al-Awda NY and the Palestinian Assembly Federation also wants to make sure that we thank the Students for Justice in Palestine at the New School for hosting us tonight. We thank you so much. I also want to say thank you to Muhammad Masoud of Masoud Studio for helping us with the live stream. You are a hero. Thank you so much. And thank you all. Please support us by following our social media handles. They're up here. Please support our work by going on the link tree. It would really help if you could at least give us a follow or a donation. Thank you so much for being with us. And we will have this recording.